we turn the page on 2025 and look forward to 2026. I think Marian, I think this is her first time on the program. We've had a couple of our fellow case managers and workers from time to time. But Marian, I think this is your first time on the show, so thank you and welcome, and thank you for sharing with us how the year went in the casework.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. And yes, this is my first time. So thank you for welcoming me. So I'm Marian. I'm an enforcement attorney at Reliability First. And today I'm just going to give a high-level overview of the enforcement data from 2025 alongside years in the past. And I'd like to identify our accomplishments from 2025 and then articulate what we hope to accomplish in the future. So let's jump in. Next. Oh, thank you. Okay, so the three data sets that I'm going to present today are going to discuss our annual intake year over year, our current inventory of open matters, and then our annual processing year over year. And throughout the discussion, I'm going to summarize the enforcement process and how cases move through enforcement from these 3 points. And then I want to highlight the key takeaways from each of the sets of data, especially when comparing to past years, and then identify what we hope to accomplish in the future. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to start with intake. Intake is basically the initiation of a matter with enforcement. So this data here in this bar chart reflects how many individual matters come to enforcement. And it's either through self-reporting, that includes self-logging, or monitoring engagement like an audit, a spot check, or a self-certification each year. So the number at the top of each bar is the total intake for that particular year. And then each year's bar is divided by the percentage of self-reported matters in red, or the top portion of each bar, and then the matters coming to enforcement through a monitoring engagement in blue, or the bottom portion of each bar. So if we look at 2025, for example, last year, we had 472 matters that came into enforcement. 81% of those were self-reported, and then 19% came in through a monitoring engagement. And if you look at the data, it shows that year over year consistently, the majority of cases or matters with enforcement begin with a self-report, like a self-report or a self-log. And so there are a few important takeaways from this data. So first, the fact that the majority of our matters are self-reported is a positive indication that their programs, processes, and particularly the internal controls that are implemented to comply with the reliability standards are working, because potentially non-compliant instances are identified, they're analyzed, they're self-reported, and we want to continue to encourage this positive trend of self-reporting. And then second, our intake is relatively consistent year over year. Of course, there's going to be some expected wiggle between years, depending on, there are a lot of factors that could impact what comes into enforcement. But year over year, we're relatively consistent. And so that's another key takeaway from this data. Next slide, please. Okay, so once a matter comes to enforcement, it then becomes part of our inventory. And while in our inventory, a lot of things happen. We review the factual material that's given to us. We review mitigating activities. We maybe ask some questions. We might request some evidence. But this is where the bulk of the work happens. It's the analysis of each matter to determine risk, make sure any issue is remediated, that any potential future risk is mitigated, and then craft a disposition for processing. And so the data on this slide summarizes the cases that are currently going through those steps. And I'm going to kind of start with looking at the table that's on the left-hand side of the slide. So as you can see, the matters from 2020 and 2021, so those matters that were part of the intake for those years, are resolved. 100% of those cases have been processed. The matters that remain in our inventory are from 2022, 23, 24, and 25. So that table on the left-hand side, the first column identifies the year. And then the second column from the left is the total intake values. And those are the same as from the previous slide. They're just in a different format. So if you look down at 2025, it's still 472 was our intake. And then the third column shows how many matters from that year's intake remain open. And the fourth column, so the one all the way to the right, gives you the percentage processed of the original intake per year. So if we're looking at 2025, we brought in 472 matters. There are still 360 matters that are open. And so we processed nearly a quarter of the matters that came in 2025, the same year that they came in. So there's a couple things about this data that's important. There are fewer older open matters, which means that there's a higher percentage of intake processed for those years. So for like 2022, we have 11 open matters out of an original 532, so we processed nearly 98%. So like a higher percentage of 2022 is processed than 2025. But it's important to note that the data reflects that we've also processed a good chunk of newer matters. So, almost a quarter of matters from 2025 were processed the same year they came in. And I think that's really important to highlight. So then the pie chart on the right-hand side takes the total 748 open matters, the bolded numbers in the bottom of the table, and shows how many open matters remain by year, and then the corresponding percentage of the whole. So for 2022, the 11 open matters are about 1.5% of our total number of open matters. And I do think it's important to highlight that with respect to open matters, about half of them are from last year, from 2025, and the other half are made up of older years. So, we're moving through older inventory and newer inventory at the same time. We're trying to work through the older files that may still be open, and they may still be open for a variety of reasons. Maybe we need more information, or maybe it's a higher risk situation that requires some deeper, more detailed attention. Maybe there was an extended condition review that expanded scope, and we have to make sure that the mitigating activities address the entirety of the situation. Or maybe there's a lot of evidence and we just need to take time to review it. So there are a lot of reasons that an older file may still be open. And it's important to remember that what we're looking at with the data is a snapshot. These are the numbers, but not the stories behind the numbers. And each of these numbers has a story. Some stories are longer and require a little more time. And that really does make a difference in our processing. But while we work through those issues, we're still trying to expedite newer files that come in and can be handled quickly. So we're working on both ends, older files and newer files, to make sure we're processing items as quickly as possible while still staying true to our reliability mission and addressing risk. And I think this data reflects that. Next slide, please. Okay, so once all of the work is completed for a matter, and a disposition is approved, and through our internal processes, the matter is considered processed. So this means we've completed the analysis, we've asked all the questions, we've determined risk, and we've compiled everything into a disposition that goes to NERC and FERC for review. So this chart shows how many matters completed that process by year. So it's how many files we sent out the door for review, broken down by risk. So again, the number at the top of each bar is the total number of matters that were processed for that particular year. So for 2025, we processed 489 matters. And then the bar is divided by risk. So the percentage of minimal risk items is in gray, or the top portion of each bar. The moderate risk percentage is red, or the middle portion of each bar, and then the serious risk items are blue, or the bottom portion, and they're just itty bitty little slivers on 2024 and 2025, but they are there. So again, for 2025, you can see like 83-ish% of what we processed was minimal risk, about 16% was moderate, and then less than 1% was serious risk of what we processed last year. So we are doing our best to ramp up processing volume while what I talked about before, giving the matters that require more attention the attention that they require. And one of the things that's really helped us in this effort is quality self-reporting. So if you remember from the first slide, the majority of the matters that we intake are self-reported. And when a self-report is clear, comprehensive, detailed, we have the pertinent facts that ties to the reliability standard. There are appropriate mitigating activities that both remediate noncompliance and address preventing future noncompliance. Processing is quicker, and this is particularly true if a matter is low risk. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, we're definitely focused on processing the older inventory, but while those matters may be thornier and just need a little bit more time, we're identifying the matters that can be processed quickly due to quality self-reporting and mitigation of lower risk matters. And I think the data indicates that we've ramped up our volume in 2025, and we're trying to continually improve, continue to efficiently process matters. And we're really hopeful that the data from 2026 will demonstrate, another increase in processing volume to maintain that momentum of processing lower risk items the same year that they come in, while still making sure that we're processing the older items as well. And hopefully these implemented strategies will continue to succeed. Next slide, please. So that was really fast and very high level overview of enforcement in the numbers. But if you have any questions that are specific to your entity's open matters, any processing, or even if you want guidance for self-reporting, how to improve, tips and tricks, please feel free to reach out to your case manager for more detailed information that's specific to you and your entity. If you don't know who your case manager is, you can always reach out to me or entity engagement, and we can always get you connected with the right person.
Thank you, Marian. So you stole my first question, because my question was going to be, what does an entity do if they need to find out who their case manager is? So I highly encourage that. If you do not know who your case manager is, give us a call. We'll hook you up. We'll have a Teams call. We'll have an introduction. If you're ever in Cleveland, please stop by, get some Mr. Hero, come meet your case manager. Having these connections and being able to know who this person is and talk to them is so beneficial as we work through these self-reports, to know who you're working with and know their expectations. Marian, during the presentation, you talked about, quality self-reports and, how that could really help expedite the closing of these, because no one wants these, open violations, going on for years. Entities don't, we don't, we want to get them closed out appropriately. And you talked about, a good quality self-report. So my first question is this, suppose the entity has a discovery, they identify a PNC. Do you want them to wait till they get all the information before they do that good comprehensive self-report, or do you want them to give you a heads up, a call, an email to let you know what's coming? Like, what works best for you to close these out?
So I think there's a balance with that. I think sometimes a heads up is nice, but there's balance with everything. And I'm a lawyer, so my answer is always gonna be it depends. But I think a heads up is often nice, especially when something is perhaps minimal instances, lower risk, and will likely be reported relatively quickly. When something, maybe there's an extended condition that's going to expand scope, or mitigating activities aren't going to be implemented for a while due to process improvements or for whatever reason, it's still nice to have open communication with the entities about what is coming. But typically what we're looking for is that really good, like, final product in a self-report, because that's what we process. So I guess my answer is both are good.
Marian, I liked it. As an engineer, it depends is a fantastic answer. So I think we have some common ground there. You talked a lot about how much great work we've done, and I love this last slide, because in the last couple of years we've added a couple case managers. We've added you and Bridget and Elizabeth, and now we're processing more reports than ever. I mean, we went from 362 all the way up to 489. So you're obviously working really hard, getting a lot of great work done, closing out these violations. The question that came in from the audience is, a year from now, based on, your department's expectations, based on NERC's expectations, where do we want to be regarding, this open backlog? How many, how many do we want to have open? Like, what would be a really good, successful year in 2026 regarding closing out cases?
Yeah, so I don't have specific metrics or specific numbers available for what we want to meet. I know that the volume we want to continue to improve, particularly when something is lower risk and pretty tight and we can close it the same year. I think 2025 is a good indication that the practices that we put in place with some fine tuning, we can improve our volume. So I think the answer is we just want to continue to improve, do our best, close the older matters while still focusing on risk and being able to close more minimal risk items quicker. It's not a perfect answer, but we hope to see that volume increase.
Good. Thank you. I'm going to stay on this bar chart just because the next question has to do with this is regarding the minimal, which is the gray. The question comes in and says, are all CE's compliance exceptions and FFT's find, fix, and track, are they all gray minimal? Or is there a chance a CE or a FFT, could any of those slip into that red moderate? Or once again, does it depend?
So it kind of depends. The gray minimal includes mostly compliance exceptions and dismissals. So matters that upon evaluation didn't end up violating a reliability standard. So there's still analysis and work that has to be done, but they are dismissed. It can include a minimal risk FFT. I don't know the exact percentage of what that within that 83% for 2025. I don't know whether any there how what amount of minimal risk FFTs are included in that percentage. Moderate risk is typically FFTs, and it could be settlement agreements, and then serious risk are serious risk items.
Very good. And what's interesting to me is that I look at this, the NERC projects page, and I see all these new standards coming. And we just heard from Lou regarding the cloud standards, and some of these standards are going to be more difficult and challenging and everything. What do you see in the next couple of years regarding closing out these cases? Do you think we need to make adjustments to our processes to get these closed out, or what do you see next 3 years?
We might, and I think that's part of the constant improvement that we're going to have to identify what is working for us and what we need to adjust in order to maintain our output so that processing, but continuing to keep risk in mind, is that we're still processing efficiently, with the reliability mission on our mind. So in 3 years, I think it kind of depends, right? It's going to depend on some of the implementation of the reliability standards. It might depend on some registration stuff. It might depend on volume. There are going to be a lot of factors that are going to impact what the next 3 years look like. But I think it's just identifying where things are working and where we can improve and make some tweaks, and then some expectations for future behavior. So it's going to be like a formula to try and figure out how to continue to be efficient, but also, meet our mission.
Right. And thank you. And this last question kind of transitions well into this because you get all these numbers, right? And the question comes in and says, is there triage done on all the open PNCs to determine that risk level? So as you're kind of working through that strategy, do you kind of scan them all to see if it's, minimal, moderate, serious to kind of plan your work?
Yes. Yeah. So all of the cases are looked at least at least once, sometimes twice, for risk determinations. There's an initial risk determination that kind of puts them in the minimal, moderate, or serious bucket. And then there's file development after that. And so if there are questions that come up during that initial review, that's when we'll ask RFIs. Sometimes extended condition reviews will expand scope, and so we'll need some more information on those. And the file development happens a bit more with the moderate risk and serious risk items than maybe with minimal risk items, limited instances, short duration, those types of things. But to answer your original question, yes, there is an initial look at everything to kind of place it preliminarily in a bucket, and then file development gets us to the final disposition.
Thank you, Marian. And we look forward to all this. This data is going to be in our impact report coming up with some summaries of how we did. Obviously, a lot of great work done by both our case managers and industry to get these closed out working together. We appreciate all the self-reports. Marian, I asked Tony Jablonski last month, so I'm going to ask you, what's your favorite standard?
um, oh, such a good question. I don't know that I have a favorite. They're all, yeah, I can't pick one. It's like having a favorite kid. I don't have one. They're all the best.